the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
This front here, you're wearing the Tennessee hat, and I'm curious, as someone who's seen a lot of Tennessee athletics over the years, who would be on your Tennessee volunteer sports Mount Rushmore? Who all time fits the bill for you? Who are those for?
Well, Todd Helton
Okay.
is in every memory right now, and there's a street named after him on campus, along with Peyton Manning. So those are the two. I would say that I'm going to put somebody in there you never heard of, but I'm going to leave everybody with the opportunity to Google him. In high school, one of my best friends was a guy named Charlie Fulton. He went to Tennessee when there was a single wing. Our high school in Memphis played single wing when it was no longer being played. Tennessee was one of the last major schools to play single wing. He was the last single wing tailback and the first quarterback in a real system for Tennessee. And he went on to become the most valuable player in the Canadian Football League. He was my high school teammate. His name was Charlie Fulton. I put him on my Mount Rushmore.
I love that.
Basketball, I became very close friends with a guy named Tom Borwinkle. Now, he doesn't belong to Mount Rushmore. Tom Borwinkle had played at a military school in Kentucky. He was 7 feet tall when there weren't many 7-footers. And he couldn't walk and chew gum, and that's a famous old cliche, but he couldn't. He went on to play with the Bulls with Michael Jordan and won 3 or 4 championships as a starting center, and then got a seat on the Chicago Stock Exchange. And has had a brilliant life for a guy that couldn't walk and chew gum and was just 7 feet tall. And I would walk around campus at Tennessee with him, and girls would say, "How tall are you?" And he'd say 6'8". He never wanted anybody, embarrassed him to be 7 feet tall. I think that, help me out here. There was the 2 players that were basketball players.
Oh, Bernard King and Ernie Grunfeld?
Yes. I'm trying to think of who, latter day would be better, but the Arnie and Bernie show, I think I would have to put them side by side on that mountain.
Yeah.
So maybe Charlie Fulton won't ever be on anybody else's, but he was all SEC, but he played 2 different. He was there for the end of the single wing and the beginning of, but I also think you would have to put a longtime coach on there who was maybe the greatest football player. Other than Peyton Manning that was there that finished second in the Heisman Trophy and then came back to coach the team for years and years. And Johnny Majors, that we're talking about.
Left the national champion to coach Tennessee.
Pardon me?
He left that. He won a national title at Pitt and then still proceeded to leave that team to go to Tennessee.
Yeah. And I guess that would be it for me in terms of, I know when I was in high school, in college at Tennessee, I saw until I saw Dr. J, I watched Pete Maravich and covered Pete Maravich for 4 years, and then covered in pro basketball when he was with Atlanta and New Orleans, the New Orleans Jazz. There's the question of the day for people. Utah Jazz, I've been to Utah 100 times. You can't find a place that plays jazz. Do
you know how dumb I am, Woody? I always thought growing up, because I love the logo and you have the mountain range behind it, I just grew up thinking the Jazz was the mountain range in Utah. I just always thought that that's what that was. And I never put 2 and 2 together. It took me years. So embarrassing that I just thought there was a Jazz mountain range. And that's why they were called the Jazz. They called the Ice Jazz over there. And that's why it was. I never put 2 and 2 together. Growing up, never thought about it any other way.
They were the Jazz and they played in the Superdome. And that was the first basketball that's played in a football stadium. For Houston or whatever. And I was amazed that the players could shoot because there was no background.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now it's been people have adopted to playing in football stadiums, but I would talk to players and they'd say, "You've got no range. You don't get the perspective of what you're doing here." But Pete Maravich, watching him in college, if there had been a 3-point line, he'd have averaged 70 points a game because everything he shot was from 30 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, he rarely drove to the basket. So I would put him on my all-time college because I never saw a performer as I did with Pete Maravich.
He would have been a Steph Curry, a modern Steph Curry, if he had played later in life.
Yeah, except a much taller. That's
Yeah.
why I said there was LG Baylor.
How tall was Pete?
6'4".
Okay.
And Steph is what, 5'10". So he was much bigger. There wasn't a ball handler like Pete Maravich. I mean, he did videos for years where people adopted to that. So I guess that's the answer to your question. I thought you were going to ask me about, I'm wearing this Tennessee hat. They send me merch from Tennessee all the time because I think they put me in the media, and that's a payment of, famous people. The legendary things you're talking about. But I'll end on this story about why I became a Tennessee football fan. I was born in 1946, right at the end of the war. So I'm a baby boomer. In 1948, Ole Miss and Tennessee would always play in Memphis. Go back and look it up. My dad took me to an Ole Miss Tennessee game in 1948. I was a year, not 2 years old, and it was snowing in Memphis, which was a rarity. And I didn't know that. Of course, I was 2 years old. I didn't know it until I was 12 or 13. I asked my dad about it. He said, he was a Tennessee. I said, "You were from Mississippi?" He said, "I was a Tennessee fan. I liked the colors. I liked Tennessee under a famous general who was coach of the team." And he said, "Maybe you'll grow up to be a Tennessee fan."
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas Podcast. Hell yeah.